Okay, let's take a look at what we're doing with AutoMapper here and have a think about whether what we're doing is really the optimal approach. And let's go take a look. So inside my terminal, I have the queries that are going to our database, and I'm just going to right click and use the clear in the terminal. Then I'm going to go back to Postman and I'm going to rerun the request to get user by username and send. Then I'm going to go back to the terminal and take a look at the query that went to our database. Now we're selecting from our database, and we're selecting everything because we're getting an app user back. And then we're joining that user to our photos and returning to our user. But this part here where we're selecting all of the different properties, is that the most optimal approach to making a query to our database? Well, it's unavoidable just now because of the way that we're using AutoMapper. We're effectively using our repository to go out and get all of the users. That means getting the app users back from our database. And then once we have those app users back, then we're mapping them into member DTO objects. Is there a better way? And is that the only way to use AutoMapper? Or is that the only way to get related properties? Well, no, there's a different way to go about doing this. And if we take a look at our user repository, and we take a look at the get user by username, this include method doesn't give us the opportunity to select what we're looking for. And instead of using include here, what we could do, for example, is we could use projection and we could say select. And inside our selects, we could say X goes to a new member DTO. And then inside here, we could start mapping our properties. We could say the ID equals x.id. We could say the known as, and I could go on and do this for each individual property of our member DTO. And that is mapping code, and it's tedious to write. And I'd rather use the tool that we have available, which is AutoMapper. So let's just put the code back to how it was temporarily. Or not temporarily, because I want to create additional repository methods to go and get members rather than interfering with what we already have, because this one's getting users and this one here as well. And I want to create repository methods that are more clear about what we're returning from our repository. So instead of returning app users, I want to return members. So we'll go back to our interface first. So we'll go to the iUser repository, and we're going to create a couple of extra methods inside here. So I'm going to create a task that's going to return an IEnumerable of type member DTO, and I'm going to call this method getMembersAsync. And we'll also create a task that's going to return a member DTO, and we'll call this one getMemberAsync. That's going to take the string of the username. And then we'll go to our user repository and we'll implement the interface again to get the two additional methods inside here that we've just created. Now inside this repository, we are going to also inject IMapper into this. So I'm going to say IMapper and mapper, and then we can use AutoMapper to project into a member DTO from an app user. So let's see how this works. So we'll start off with the getMemberAsync. And this is going to be an async task. And we're going to return await, and we're going to say context.users. And then below this, we're going to say project to. And this is what we get from AutoMapper. It's called a queryable extension, because what we're working with is referred to as a queryable when we're querying our database. So we're going to project to, and then we say what we want this to be. And we want this to be a member DTO. And this takes a parameter, and we need to give this the location of our mapping configuration. And we can do that by saying mapper and then selecting configuration provider. And this is for our individual member. So above the project to, we also need to say which user we're looking for. So I'm going to use where and say x goes to x.username. That's equal to the username. And I've got my parentheses the wrong way round there. Somehow. Okay, so we get our context users where the username equals the username. Then we're going to project, map that into a member DTO, and then we just need to say single or default async to actually execute this method. Now I'm getting a warning here because I forgot to make this optional in the interface. So I'll go back to the iUser repository, and we need to make this optional, the member DTO, as we're handling this inside the controller anyway. And then what we're returning, the member DTO here, I also need to use the optional operator there as well. So that's going to return a member DTO, and for this one, to get members async, again I'm just going to make this an async task, and we're going to return await and context.users, and again I'm going to use the project to, and we're projecting to a member DTO, and we provide it the mapper and the configuration provider, and we're going to say to list async. And then we can go back to our users controller, and we're not going to use mapper inside here because we're mapping at the repository level or the database level. And we're going to say our users is our user repository and get members async, and we don't need the users to return. So I will remove that, and we're simply going to return our users. And for this one, the getUser method, I'm going to say get member async with the username, and we don't need to map inside here, so we can just return the user. And let's just go ahead and restart our app once again, thanks to our usage of cold reload or freezing reload. I do think it needs rebranding because it's not doing what it's advertised, and we'll just click send, make sure our code is still working just as it did before, and it is. And if I go and get all of the users, then yep, that's working too. But let's go and take a look at the terminal, see if we've made any improvements, and I'll just clear the terminal window again and go back to the individual user, click send, and see if we've made any improvements. Because now we're selecting directly what we need from the database, what we shouldn't see is this password salt and password hash being requested. The whole point of this little exercise was to only select from the database what we need, as in what's in the member DTO, rather than selecting everything. But that didn't seem to do its job, and the reason for that actually is inside our app user where we've got this get age. Unfortunately, for this functionality to work, it needs to go and get the app user before it can calculate the age, because the date of birth doesn't exist on the member DTO. So we can't do this at that level. So we're going to do something different. So I'm just going to comment out the get age, and we're going to go back to our AutoMapper profiles. And we're going to add another configuration inside here. So just above the photo one, I'm going to say for member, and the destination is d.age, and the option, we're going to say o.mapFrom, and the source is going to be s goes to s.dateofbirth, and then we can use our calculate age extension inside here. So that means it will not need to go and get the full app user object, or at least that's the theory. So I'm just going to stop and restart my API again. Simply not going to trust it to do that job anymore. And once that has restarted, I'm just going to clear the terminal once again, head back to Postman and make the same request again. And what we should find now is that we've got a cleaner query going to our database. It doesn't change much, we're just selecting exactly what we need instead of selecting everything. And we get that facility by using AutoMapper queryable extensions. So that's kind of really the optimum way we can get our app user along with the photos and populate the photo URL property as well. And okay, that brings us to the end of this particular section. So just like any other section, now that we've got to the end, let's go to source control and we'll save our changes into there. So I'm just going to stage all of the changes, and I'm going to give it a commit message of end of section 8, and I'll commit these changes and sync them up with GitHub, and we'll wrap this up with a summary.